All right, it looks like we're live. Thanks for joining me here tonight, guys, for this episode of J-Stan Studio. It's been a while since I've done one of these streams, actually, so I'm really excited to kind of get back into things. Let me know if things look good, if they sound good. It's been a while since I've used some of these tools, so it wouldn't surprise me if things have gotten a little bit weird over the course of time. So what I thought we'd do today is I was going to do a landscape, but I was listening to I was rather watching a video that artist named Peter Hahn did. Peter Hahn does some awesome work, mostly in ink, and he has a really cool style. I just really enjoy his artwork, and I really enjoy the way that he does live streams and videos. He's just very conversational and very just sort of back and forth with the people that are watching him. It's a really cool thing, so definitely go check him out. But something that he mentioned from when he was going through art school was that it was a landscape painting class that he took, and he mentioned how the instructor made him go through an entire painting. This was one of the exercises. He made him go through an entire painting using only a 1-inch brush. And I think that he mentioned that the canvas was only like 3 inches by 4 inches or like 4 inches by 6 inches or something like that. So it was kind of a crazy challenge that you have this big old 1-inch brush here. And you're using this on a really tiny canvas. I mean, 4 inches by 6 inches with a 1-inch brush, you could cover the entire thing in 4 or 5 strokes. So it's really kind of crazy in that respect. But I really kind of thought about that challenge a little bit, and I think we're going to be doing that over here on the canvas. This is, I think, 9 by 12. This is a canvas pad. So what this is it looks like a normal sheet of or a normal sketch pad, rather, that has many sheets in it. But this is actually canvas, like you'd see on a stretched canvas, like you might see on a wall or something like that. So it's individual sheets of canvas that are already prepped and ready to go. I've put down a little bit of color. This is in a little bit of rough shape, but I kind of like that. I'm going to see where it goes. So what I'm going to paint today is actually a painting from, so if you have a Windows machine, Windows 10, they have that like a landscape that appears every time you log into your computer, and sometimes it changes, and it's just different places around the world. So I'll be painting one of those. So this is actually the second landscape that I'll be painting looking at reference. And you might say, hey, that shows that you don't look at reference. It's something that I'm trying to do a little bit better, is to look off of different pieces and paint and draw while I look off of a model or something like that, because it makes the process a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is I just have a little spray bottle here. So that's just ordinary water. I bought this at Hobby Lobby, and I'm just going to spray a little bit of water down on the surface of this just to kind of get things wet and get things, kind of with the paint, get it moving, all such as that. I'll dampen my brush a little bit, and I'll just go into a little bit of blue color that I have over here. You'll see I have my canvas over here. Over here is my palette, so it's just out of frame there. Just come in here and brush in a little bit of a nice blue color for the sky. This is kind of maybe like late afternoon, early evening sort of look. So the sky's got a little bit of blue up towards the top. And as you come downwards towards the horizon line, it gets a little bit kind of orangish, pinky, sort of a rose type of color. So it's a pretty little scene. Got too much water on my brush here, but that's okay. I'll just bring this blue down a little bit, add a little bit more paint. And you might say, why would you do a challenge like this? Why would you force yourself to paint simply with a 1-inch brush and not go anywhere else? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, especially when you're more of an amateur and you're kind of starting out. It can help to have more of a limited sort of look to things. A limited feel of what you have at your disposal. If you have too many brushes or too many colors, at that point it's very easy that it could become confusing. You're not quite sure which brush you're using. You're not really being mindful about the decisions that you're making because you have so many options at your disposal. So I think that having just a single brush really kind of helps to clarify and helps to just sort of make that whole process of decision making easier. I think that it also, I'm just going to grab a little bit here and blot this up a little bit. It also helps in the respect that it helps you focus on the things that are essential about the painting. You know, I look at a lot of paintings out there and it's like, why are these paintings so much better than what I'm doing? And I mean, obviously part of the reason is that I haven't done as many paintings as like John Singer Sargent or somebody like that. But another part of the reason is that the majority of what's right about the painting is stuff it's not the flash, it's not the glitzy stuff. A lot of what's there that's really making that look like a great painting is stuff that's foundational. It's stuff that's underneath everything else. Like 20% of what's actually there is conveying 80% of the visual information. It's kind of like that 80-20 rule. And I think that that's a good thing to kind of keep in mind, and it's a good thing to practice. And this 1-inch brush exercise really helps for that. What I'm doing right now is, because this is so wet right now, I can actually lift a little bit of paint out of the canvas with that little Kleenex that I had. So I'm actually just dotting in a little cloud shape there. It kind of came out pretty nice. I might do that a little bit more. These are just things that I'm sort of experimenting with and picking up. I do enjoy doing these live streams. It's just been a while since I've done one for various reasons, you know, life and things getting in the way and stuff like that, and other responsibilities and, you know, all such as that. So other things have been on my mind. I've got other projects that I've been working on and so forth, but it's nice to come back and do this. All right, so towards the horizon line, I'm going to start to put in that little bit of rosiness like I was talking about. So let me open up my reference image over here. I'm also working with a little bit more of a limited palette, and I've noticed that that's kind of been the direction that I've been going in, to kind of limit the amount of colors that I have on my palette at any given time. I think that in general, it's another thing where it makes things a little bit simpler, makes them a little bit more clear in terms of what you're doing. And for me, if I'm looking at a color and I'm trying to match it to something, at that point, if I only have red, blue, and yellow on my canvas, at that point it's like, well, okay, does it need more red? Does it need more blue? Or does it need more yellow? It makes it much more obvious in terms of how I should be mixing the colors. So I'm going to put this in towards where the horizon line is. This is just a very simple stroke. This is just a synthetic brush that I'm using. It's 1 inch wide. I think officially this is actually a gesso brush, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm using it anyway. And if you're just joining, feel free to drop a comment in that live chat over there. Feel free to comment on anything if you have questions about what I'm doing, or if you've got anything that you want to talk about or anything like that. If I can explain anything, feel free to chat and hang out. This is definitely just a time to sort of, for me to come in and relax and do a little bit of fun painting and just have a good time. All right. Now, so we've got kind of our sky shapes up here with some of the clouds. I'll go in and kind of make those cloud shapes a little bit firmer later. But I'm pretty happy with the way that this looks right now. What I'm going to do now is there's some mountains in the far background. So those are just basically going to look like purplish, bluish shapes back there. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of red, mix those together to get me sort of a purplish color. This right now is a little bit too red, what I've got on my palette over here. So I just added in a little bit more blue. And I might add just a little dab of black. I think black is a good thing to have on the canvas, or on the palette, but it's important not to overdo it. And it's easy to do with black, and I think that I just did. So I'm mixing in a little bit more red to kind of liven this back up a little bit. The main problem with black paint is that a lot of times it becomes overpowering. And it kind of dulls everything out and just kind of makes things look muddy. you can get better results by mixing in blues with other colors and kind of using that blue color with everything else that's going on to kind of darken things down and push it down in terms of its value. This canvas is still pretty wet here. I'm going to have to dab it a little bit to kind of calm this down a little bit. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat too. Ooh, still very wet here, quite clearly. That's okay. So these are just going to represent mountain shapes, you know, far away hills, stuff like that. I think that I'm actually pretty satisfied with the way that these look. Because they're so far away and they're so far in the background, you're not going to see much detail on them. And it's not really much to worry about. Really what you're kind of looking for is just the atmospheric perspective, which is going to make things appear bluer and hazier as you get further away from the camera. And that's just the effect of more and more air being in between the viewer and the actual subject that they're viewing. All right, so I'm going to dry off this brush a little bit. Try to kind of calm things down because this is still pretty wet. Down here it's not quite so bad. Up here it's almost like watercolor going on, and I think because I have some gesso on this canvas, nothing's really soaking in right now, so it's taking a little bit longer to dry. Acrylic paint has a tendency to dry out pretty fast, actually. So it's a little bit of a surprise that it's not quite dry yet, which kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop, but it's all right. Okay, so as I'm looking at my reference image, we've got a little bit of a landmass that kind of comes across here. There's a little bit of water actually right here that's maybe like a river or something flowing through, so I want to make sure that I get that. This landmass here is kind of in a strip that comes up diagonally like this, and it looks to be kind of a darkish green with maybe a little bit of brown in it out there. So maybe there's some grass out there, but it's pretty far out there at this point. So on my palette over here, I've got phthalo green. I've got raw umber over here. So I think I'm going to try to use a little bit of both of those. I'll probably start off with the raw umber color. Grab a little bit of the phthalo green. And then I'll probably brighten it up a little bit with a touch of lemon yellow. This is still a little bit dark for what I'm seeing here. With a little bit of that yellow, it kind of brings up the color a little bit. All right, and I'm going to kind of try to mimic what's going on, the shapes that I see going on here in my reference image. Just like that. So I was talking about some of the other projects that I've been working on lately, and one of the big things was for an anthology of comics recently. It's a part of a group of artists that I follow on Discord and that I'm a part of. It's called the AAA Creators Discord. They do comics. You know, people are really into comics on there, so they make their own comics. And I created a 5-page comic called A Shortcut to Doomsday that I had put into one of their anthologies. So that's actually been printed and went to print maybe 2 weeks ago. So I actually have a link to it in the description for, it's a link to a website called Lulu, where you can order a copy of that. I think there's 5 stories in it, and it's like 85 pages, I think, or something like that. There's a lot of really, really talented artists that are a part of it. So I definitely recommend that you check that out. I think the copies cost like $6 a piece or something like that. So it's super cheap for what you get. There's a lot of, like I said, a lot of talented artists that are in there. Kind of makes me feel bad sometimes because some of the guys are just phenomenal, and gals too. Just phenomenal artists, phenomenal writers. It's a really cool group to be a part of. if you want to just purchase my comic, I put it up on my coffee shop for like 50 cents or something like that for a digital PDF. So that's in the description too if you want to follow that and check that out. But it's kind of a fun little comic. It's the theme of the anthology was interstellar, so it's all stories about space travel and stuff like that, which is awesome. It was certainly up my alley for sure. All right, now there's another landmass that's coming across here that's more in the foreground here. So I'm going to brighten that up because it's closer to us. The colors are going to be a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more bright. So similar color to this, just a little bit punchier. So I'm going to add in a little bit more lemon yellow to the color that I was using before. Maybe just a little dab of white. White and black kind of function the same way. It's nice to have them, but you really want to be careful not to overdo them. All right. Just looking at the reference, pull this down. That's not quite distinct enough from the middle ground for my taste. That's a little bit better. But yeah, that anthology is super cool. I definitely recommend checking that out if you get a chance. There's one artist in there that's, his work is just incredible. Guy named Aaron did the cover too. I'm always inspired every time I see something of his pop up in my Instagram feed or on that Discord. He's just mind-blowing, some of the stuff he does. And he does some work too that's kind of like graffiti work and kind of incorporates that sort of graffiti style into a lot of the stuff that he does. And it's distinct, it's fresh, it's cool. I like it. That story that I mentioned that I did, that includes my characters, Roman and Sven, from the previous 9-volt that I submitted to. It's a much shorter story, though, this time, which probably would have been a better way to start, if I'm being honest. Probably shouldn't have done my first story as an 18-pager. That was a little bit, some might say ambitious, others might say just plain foolhardy. But it's what I did. I was pretty pleased with the way things turned out. Something that I am looking to work on, though, working on a couple of other projects, and I want to make sure that I spend a little bit more time on each individual project. I tend to be a guy who's a little bit manic isn't the right word, but I work at a pretty breakneck pace a lot of the times, trying to get this done and move on to this thing and everything. So I'm trying to kind of slow down a little bit. Okay. Next step here is there's a couple of mountains, they're not even really mountains in this picture that I'm looking at. I haven't even shown you this picture yet. It's at the top picture here. I don't know if you can see that super well on the camera. If I were like a pro streamer, I would have totally had this and just pop it up on the screen for you as like a little screenshot there. But there's a couple of little rock formations there that are in the foreground that I kind of like. And what I'm going to do here is, I don't know if you can see this, but I've actually kind of loaded paint into the bristles. So we've kind of loaded the bristles so that they kind of stick together and kind of come to a point there. Show that to this camera as well. And that's going to help me get a little bit more of that angled look, angled piece for some of these guys. This one kind of comes up here into the sky and then gets a little bit wider as we get down closer towards the base. Try to make this so that it's a similar shape to what's in the actual reference photo. But yeah, as I've been thinking about things, just how I work and what I'd like to do, what I'd like my art to be and everything like that, I think just making a little bit more time to work on each individual project, going slow, making sure that it really is, really does finish to be the way that I want it to be. 'Cause I'm always happy about work that I do, but I always want to make sure that I'm improving, getting better, and that everything is kind of becoming more and more the vision that I'd like it to be, if that makes sense. I think that we live in a world that kind of moves a little bit too fast a lot of the times. Just want to make sure that I'm not skittering away out of frame with the canvas itself here. And then, let's see. So I'll just brush in a little bit there. Come up a little bit there. Might add a little bit of bulk to this one. Right now, what I'm really doing using only the 1-inch brush hasn't really hampered me at all at this point. It will start to as I start to go into more details on some of these pieces. And so there's a little rock formation that's kind of in the foreground here that's in front of these other pieces. It's like a little mountainy type rock that's jutting up out of the ground there. And then there's a little bit of rocky ground over in this section here. So I'm pretty happy with the general lay-in of a lot of these shapes. And really, that's kind of what I'm focusing on at this point, in all honesty, is just shapes. And that's really one of the big intentions of this exercise of working with this massive brush, is you start to think in terms of really big sections of color, and even more than that, sections of value too, so that you have the proper shapes. Shapes is one of those fundamentals that really kind of holds everything together. And really, like I said, it's one of that 20% of things that kind of carries the weight of 80% of the visual information that you have. All right. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to come in and, all right, the sky area is much drier than it was before, so that's good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and do a little bit more when it comes to these cloud shapes. So I'll just come in and grab a little bit of white paint. And what I'm doing to kind of manipulate the shape of my brush here and give me a little bit of a leg up, because I only have this one brush, is I've just basically, this camera will be better for this, I pulled it through the white paint just in one direction. And if you see, the paint is kind of causing the bristles to clump up into kind of like a curved shape on the corner of this. I'll show this camera over here too. So I've kind of got just like this little hump of white paint that's right on the corner of the brush. And I'm going to use that to paint some of these clouds. I want to wipe off a little bit of it. Excuse me, just because I don't want things to blow up on there, because white is such a strong color. I'll just sort of dab some of these spots with my finger as well. So as I'm making these clouds, comes time, it's important to think about the light source. So where is everything being lit from? As I'm looking at my reference photo, and I take a quick peek at it again, the lighting that's coming from this is actually coming from the camera, almost like a 30 or 45 degree angle. So these rock formations that are inside of the photo here are all being lit from this side. So I'm going to want to make sure that I carry that over even into the sky as well, because these little, the clouds are going to need to be lit from that side as well in order for the visual information to make sense at that point. So I'm going to come in and firm up these clouds a little bit, just sort of dabbing here and there. I want to make sure that I'm not scooting out of the frame for you guys again. If I am, just let me know in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that. And of course, feel free to, if you have any questions, or even if you just want to chat and talk about what your favorite episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, I'm always game to talk about that. Or The Simpsons or something. I don't know, whatever you guys want to talk about. This is definitely just a time to have fun and hang out. I'm really liking this canvas pad thing that I bought at Hobby Lobby. It was like 10 bucks for 20 sheets or 30 sheets or something like that. But I like it because it stands up to the paint much better. I was using some pretty heavy paper like Bristol board, but the problem was that even though it was so thick and heavy, it would still sort of warp and buckle as some of the water sort of soaked into it. I don't know if it comes across in the live stream or not, but every now and then it would just get all kind of wrinkly, and you'd have to worry about actually damaging the paper because of how much water content you had in there. And it was a hassle. I felt like I was fighting the materials, and it was like, why am I doing this? Something that's kind of interesting that I'm seeing happening down here is that some of this purple paint, because it was so wet and even still is wet, wow, is actually seeping a little bit into that blue paint of the sea there. I actually kind of like it. It's a good effect, honestly. It kind of gives it that look of reflection and a little bit of darkness in the water and everything. I'll probably go in and firm up that line a little bit later, but I like the way that it's looking, so I'm not too concerned. All right. So now that we've got some additional stuff happening up here in the sky, I'm going to move in to do some of the details here, and I'm actually going to need a little bit more yellow paint. I put out a little blotch onto my palette at the start of things, but I've actually already used all of it, surprisingly enough. So just squeeze out a little bit more of that. And this is just Master's Touch Fine Art Studio lemon yellow acrylic paint. Got it at Hobby Lobby. It's apparently $6 a tube. So nothing major. I don't use really super expensive stuff, as you can probably tell. But I prefer it that way. I prefer things to be less fancy. A little bit, I don't know. I guess I started off painting Warhammer 40K miniatures. That was how I actually got started in really being interested in art. So I used acrylic paints all the time there. And I mean, I played 40K, but I didn't have a ton of money, which doesn't seem like, that really makes sense. I didn't have a lot of pocket change. I wasn't working a lot as a teenager and stuff like that. So I used pretty cheap, just hobby paints and kind of got used to those things. All right, so I've got a little bit of a brighter yellow color on my brush now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of come in here and add some highlights into this foreground area. I'm actually pretty happy with the way that this middle ground area of grass looks. So I'm going to keep that as is. I'm just sort of going to dab a little bit here and there. And what I'm going to try to do is sort of follow the curvature of the hills. So as I'm looking at my reference image, this hill kind of comes down over the front. Kind of opens up in front of this. And at this point too, this hill is far enough away from the camera that it's not like I'm painting individual blades of grass or anything like that. I think that was the biggest thing about landscape painting that I learned that really helped me, honestly, was I think that a lot of people get frustrated because they get locked into, oh, I have to paint every leaf. I have to paint, this is how the tree looks. I need to paint every blade of grass, every little twig that comes off of the branch. And it's like, you just don't need that. A lot of times it's more about shapes. It's more about patches of value and patches of colors that really make things go and convey the visual information in a way that's understandable and appealing. All right, so I'm going to look a little bit more at my reference image here, and I'm actually going to put in a really bright yellow spot. Might even put in just a touch of red to make this a little bit orange. Kind of reflect that maybe early afternoon glow on this section right here as we come through. This is where it's rough being a lefty. Ordinarily, you work you work in the way where you're going to be smearing your work a little bit less. I have a tendency to be a little bit more chaotic neutral when it comes to where I put my painting. I actually need to brighten this up a little bit. So come in here with a little bit more of the yellow, go straight over the top of that. Cool. Come in here and I'll put a little bit on this piece. Looks like it's coming off of this mountain shape here. And maybe a little bit more in between these two as well. Kind of fill that out. Just like that. All right. I'm really liking the way things are looking at this point. So I think what's left to do at this point is to come in here into these mountain shapes. It's still a little bit wet, actually. Come into some of these mountain shapes and add in, kind of cut in some of those details. So what we're going to want to do is add our highlights. Our highlights are going to be, so the light's coming from this way, they're going to be on the leftmost side of a lot of these rock formations. And the light and the shadow is really going to define a lot of these shapes. It's going to make them look like rocks. So the light and the shadow here is going to be carrying quite a bit of load in terms of conveying visual information about this rock formation. I'll probably go for maybe 10 more minutes on this. I should be pretty close to done actually looking at this, I think. Might be some last minute refinements that I go into, but overall I'm pretty pleased with the way that things have turned out with this painting so far. It's been interesting to work with this 1-inch brush just because it does eliminate a lot of the thoughts that I'm doing about this. It helps me to try to be a little bit less fancy, try to be a little bit less clever, if that makes sense, and a little bit more focusing on the fundamentals of things. I'm going to put in a little bit of red into this. What I put down there is pretty yellow. This really should be a little bit more of a tan or a brown or something like that. I've loaded up the bristles again so that they're kind of up in sort of a wedge or a chisel shape. And that's going to help me get some of these details in here without absolutely blowing up everything. Let's see. Looking at the reference again, the shape kind of comes around like this. And then there's a little bit that comes out here. And fills up over here. There's a little bit of a break, and I just reshaped my brush here because what I'm seeing in the reference image is that there's a tiny little, let me grab my palette knife here. There's a tiny little area of brown that's sort of in shadow in between this shape and this next shape that I'm about to make. So I really need that to be sharp here so that I can get that shape and keep that little bit of brown in between there. I didn't quite hit it perfectly, but that's all right. We're going to come down here, just like that. And what I actually need out of this, in order to create separation, because these are both, this little mountain in front and this are both in the highlight area, because this is closer to the camera, I actually need to separate this with an edge purely off of brightness. So there's not going to be a shadow in between here and there, but there needs to be a separation visually still. So I'm going to come in after I'm done with this section, this level of highlight over here, in order to put that in. And if that doesn't make sense, I will explain that in just a moment when I actually go in to do that. Grab a little bit more paint. Here we go. right. Then we'll put a little bit of highlight over here as well. Just sort of following the shapes that I'm seeing. In terms of other projects that I'm working on right now, let's see, what am I working on? I'm working on another issue of the comic of Roman and Sven, the characters that I mentioned earlier. Really starting to kind of flesh out the universe that they live in and the conflict that they're facing, the adversaries that they are encountering and everything. I think I've always had a thing for comics, so that's something that I want to continue working on. Thinking about doing some live art shows now that things are starting to open up a little bit more as well. So kind of thinking about that, what I might be able to do for that, some places to go, and what I might want to actually bring to sell there. It seems like people are, in general, a little bit happier doing like commission work, which I also enjoy. Seems like people are a little bit more, they want that a little bit more, which makes sense. Because, I mean, let's face it, unless you have the perfect spot for this painting that you saw Jim do with a 1-inch brush, it's probably not exactly something that you just come in and just buy off the shelf necessarily. This is the spot where I'm going to separate this with a little bit of brighter color. So I'm really going to dial up, actually making this almost like a rose color, very light rose. As I put it on there, it's going to kind of dull out a little bit, which I'm kind of relying on because most rocks aren't rose colored. Although sometimes they are when the right light hits them. Let me just pull up my reference one last time. Yeah, I think that we're pretty good. We're not too far off here, honestly. So put that in. And we're kind of wrapping up now, getting close to the end, but if you have any questions or suggestions or anything like that, feel free to post those in the chat, leave a comment after the fact. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, please give it a thumbs up, like it. If you want to see more of what I'm doing, you can always subscribe if you like by hitting that subscribe button. The little bell thing will let you know when I'm going to be going live and doing other stuff in the future. I'm just kind of adding a little bit of this brighter color to my highlight areas to kind of bring everything together. Add in a little bit of harmony in all these colors. And then what I am going to do is I'm going to come in and I'll go into blue and black mostly, a touch of red to give it a little bit of color and complexity, so it kind of comes out as a dark purple color that I'm working on now. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come back into these spots that I don't have the highlight in and just put down a little bit of extra shadow color just to kind of give things a little bit more interest. Considering putting together a little book of artwork that I've done in the past, different landscapes and other art. Been posting some things that haven't been necessarily landscapes on my Instagram page recently. Got a couple different artworks of like fantasy monsters. I did some artwork of saints actually. So I've got some of those up there as well. I did one recently of the White Ranger and the Green Ranger together, kind of like a face shot of that I really liked. I was happy with how that came out. Just kind of doing some experimentation, really trying to grow in art too and not get too complacent or too comfortable just with doing landscapes, because that's certainly an area of comfort and one that I really love, but I want to keep continuing to push the envelope, you know, keep growing in that respect. All right, we're getting pretty darn close to the end here. So I'll be wrapping up shortly, but I'm just going to go in and kind of clean up some of these edges. Put a little bit of green down there at the bottom. Kind of make it look maybe like a little shadow area. Little shadow area, and smudge this together a little bit. And just have some fun. I think that we're about done, honestly. I'm pretty happy with the way that this piece turned out. I think that there's a little bit of cleanup that I might be able to do, and maybe especially this would be the time to pull out some smaller brushes and kind of work on that. I might come in with my palette knife here, grab a little bit of white, and come into the background here, and just sort of put in a little bit of water detail, maybe a little bit back here as well. Make sure that I don't have some green paint on my finger while I do that. All of a sudden have some like horrible algae growth in the middle of that lake. Just kind of put in a couple little suggestions of detail in the background here, maybe a little bit more. Ooh. Didn't intend to quite go that far, but yeah, I think we're about done. So with that being said, I think we'll wrap things up for today. Appreciate you joining for the stream, or if you're catching the replay, thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or any suggestions, please feel free to leave them below in the comment section. If you'd like to check out any of the things that I was talking about, I've got some links in the description as well, so feel free to take a look at those as well. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.